Sup, and welcome to the 10th episode of A Random Review. And in today's episode, I am reviewing 1986's Top Gun, which was directed by Tony Scott and stars Tom Cruise. And the reason I'm reviewing this is because I am recording this in the year 2022. A pretty solid year for movies, and a pretty terrible year for everything else. And for me, Top Gun 2 has just been released in theaters, and I'm gonna go see it. But up until recently, I had never seen the first Top Gun. So I rectified that. I finally watched the first movie, and I'm gonna review it here. And then in the next video, I'll review its sequel. And the reason I never saw Top Gun up until now, even though I'm a film dork and I try to see all of these movies, is because when I was growing up in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Top Gun was such a staple of pop culture. It was such a famous movie that got referenced so much that I felt like I had already seen it. It's the same reason why I've never seen Office Space. There comes a point where if I absorb enough references of something that I come to the conclusion that I already know all the best parts about it, then it becomes hard for me to muster up the energy to actually sit down and watch it, because it would just feel redundant to me. And plus, I know that if I already know all about something, but have never seen it, I never have to worry about that thing eventually disappointing me or not living up to the hype, which, in all fairness, would probably happen. Like, if I watched Office Space, it might be great, but it probably wouldn't be able to exceed the years and years of references that I've already taken from it, without even seeing it. So, what's the point? And, again, maybe that's just me being weird, but I was probably never gonna see Top Gun if its sequel didn't come out. But it did, and thus I finally saw it. I finally had a reason to see this thing. And was it worth it? Well, we'll get to that. So, in case you don't know, this movie is about a Navy fighter pilot called Maverick, starring Tom Cruise, who is trying to get through a school for elite fighter pilots known as Top Gun. And Maverick is a maverick, hence the name. He's reckless and arrogant and cocky, and throughout the movie, we follow his journey as he gets closer and closer to graduating this esteemed program. And the first thing I have to say about this movie is that Top Gun is like the consummate 80s movie. If you took a romance movie from the 1980s, and a cop movie from the 1980s, and a high school movie from the 1980s, and you smushed them together with all the things that came with them, and then you threw in some fighter planes, this is what you'd get. It's got all these ingredients, like montages and synth music and the hero having a rival, that if you put into a modern movie exactly as it is here, it would be criticized because of how overplayed and cliche some of this now is. For example, there are like 3 scenes in this movie where Maverick gets hauled in front of his superiors and gets reamed for something. And it's straight out of every old cop movie you've ever seen, where the instructor is like, "Damn it, Maverick, you're a loose cannon who doesn't play by the rules. If you pull one more stunt, one more time, I'm kicking you out. But don't tell anyone I said this. Goddamn if you're not also the best pilot I've ever seen." And as I was watching this, I kept having to tell myself not to judge this movie too harshly for this, because these things weren't derivative at the time. This is just what you did when you made a movie back then. And if anything, this movie was probably the originator for a lot of these things becoming cliches in the first place. Because again, this was an extremely popular movie. Okay, so the movie starts off with Maverick and this other pilot named Cougar flying out to meet these unidentified fighter planes in the middle of the ocean. And the one thing I have to give the movie is that it looks really good. This was made back when CGI wasn't being pumped into movies that much because the technology wasn't there yet. And so all of these shots of the jets flying around are real, and you can tell that these are real planes that are really doing this. And it's cool. The flying scenes hold up really well for a film from the 1980s, and there's a very good sense of scale that you get from it. So, Maverick and Cougar scare off the unidentified fighter planes, they don't even have to fire on them, and they return to the carrier, where they get chewed out, of course. So, this was 15 minutes into the movie, and I was with it. I was like, alright, this is okay. I'm interested in seeing where this is going. And once those 15 minutes were out of the way, the film transitions to a scene where Maverick is trying to pick up a blonde woman named Charlie, played by Kelly McGillis, at a bar, and man, do I owe Doctor Strange an apology from 2 videos ago, because the romantic dialogue was cheesy in that movie, but at least it was contained to only a few scenes. In Top Gun, the movie becomes about this romance. There's a 40-minute stretch where there's almost no flying, where instead, all you're doing is following this romance, which is like the most trite, cornball, one-sided romance you'll ever see. Charlie is written to be a piece of meat in this movie. The basis of this romance is that Tom Cruise's character is so amazing that she, a mere woman, can't withstand his overwhelming greatness, that sooner or later she's gonna break down and wilt in his presence, because how could anyone fend off the advances of someone as irresistible as Maverick? This movie taps into this old school, masculine, James Bond type fantasy that if you're enough of an alpha male, if you're enough of a man, you can have any woman you want. And that even if they say no to you, even if they say they don't want to be with you, that's okay, because all you have to do is keep pressuring them, and eventually they'll see the error of their ways and submit to you. Because that's what happens when you're a real man. And in Top Gun, at least Maverick doesn't do anything as objectionable as Sean Connery's James Bond, who would assault women. But Charlie does turn him down at first, and Maverick follows her into the ladies' room and looms over her at the sink and tells this woman, who he just met, "You're making a big mistake by not being with me." And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, fuck you, dude, go away. But no, you see, I was wrong, and so was Charlie, because as it turns out, she is an instructor at his academy and works with him throughout the movie. And from that point on, every scene where they're together, it's not even like a will they, won't they, it's a how long will it take? Because for almost no reason, she just starts swooning over him. And within a couple scenes, she is madly in love with him and can't live without him. And it's so ridiculous. Not only because it happens so rapidly, it's one of these insta-romances where you look back and you're like, what the hell happened in the 5 minutes they were on screen together that she's suddenly devoted to him? It's that it's a one-way infatuation. Maverick doesn't even pursue her after the beginning of the movie. She just starts chasing after him and following him and catching up to wherever he is. And when they talk to each other, Maverick talks about himself and she talks about him. They have like the ultimate male gaze connection where she loves him and can't quit him, and he doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't need to initiate contact with her or learn anything about her or really even care about her. All he had to do was show her his face and tell her that he was a great pilot, and his work was done. And I found their scenes together to be just nauseatingly schmaltzy, and they kept going and going and going, and the whole time I was just sitting there thinking, God damn it, can we get back to the planes? Can we get back to the flying? I don't care about any of this. But unfortunately, the flying wasn't much better, because for most of the movie, the flying scenes are just practice runs. They're just training exercises where the pilots pretend to fire on each other. And in each of the scenes, Maverick does something cocky, and he gets chewed out for it by a superior, rinse and repeat. And those unidentified fighter planes at the beginning of the movie that you'd think would play a big role in this story, you never hear from them again. They play no role after that. And so, Top Gun, for most of its runtime, has no tension in it whatsoever. There's no conflict, there's no adversity. Maverick doesn't have to do anything half the time. 1 hour into this movie, Maverick has not only won over Charlie with minimal effort, he is such an amazing pilot that he is excelling at the academy. This is not an underdog story. This is him being great the entire time. And even when he gets chewed out for being reckless, it doesn't mean anything, because he's such a great pilot that he's going to graduate no matter what. It's just a matter of where he'll graduate. And worst of all, there is no present geopolitical danger that threatens anyone. There is no threat. All of his practice runs are working up to nothing, as far as we know. And so, this movie was boring to me. To me, Top Gun pales in comparison to something like the Fast and the Furious movies, the good ones. Because those movies, as silly as their interpersonal relationships also were, they at least give you a bunch of exciting action scenes to sate your appetite. With Top Gun, all you get is practice run after practice run after practice run, and unless you find that captivating, in my opinion, you do not get enough payoff for enduring the crappy romance that dominates this film. Even when something bad finally happens to Maverick, and there's finally a speed bump on his road to greatness, it doesn't even matter because, again, he's such a great pilot that even when he starts messing up, it doesn't affect whether or not he'll graduate, because he's that great. He's gonna pass no matter what. All he has to do is stop being sad, and everything's fine again, basically. And as for the climax, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, there's an alert that goes out that there's a crisis somewhere in the ocean and that some pilots need to take care of it, and that Maverick should be one of those pilots. And that's it. There's no greater stakes than that. There's no greater explanation than that. It's just, go deal with this thing. Like, you'd think that this final crisis would have massive implications for global security, or that the movie would have been building up to this crisis, or hyping this crisis, or that this exact mission was specifically what Maverick had been training for the entire film, or that this crisis was directly connected with what those unidentified fighter planes were trying to do at the beginning of the movie. You'd think that, but no, because this final crisis is so tacked on and so vague that it's not even clear who the bad guys are. We don't even know what country they're from. And so the final battle, it did nothing for me. It's not even shot all that well. I wish I could tell you that at least this looks good, at least it's fun to watch, but I can't, because the enemy fighter jets look so incredibly similar to the good fighter jets that it's hard to tell them apart when they're flying right next to each other. And so, throughout this dogfight, I didn't even know what was happening half the time. And when it was all said and done, and the credits started rolling, I had trouble identifying anything about this movie that I liked, outside of the soundtrack by Harold Faltermeyer, which was mostly really good. I say mostly because some of the softer stuff was a little too cheesy. But other than that, and some of the visuals, there's just not a lot going for this movie. And here's the thing. If you completely disagree with me, or if you see where I'm coming from, but don't really care because you're gonna love this movie no matter what because that's how much you love it, then you know what? That's fine. I don't care. The point of these videos is not to proselytize. We're all entitled to our opinion on something as frivolous as movies anyway. And I recognize that this particular film resonated with people in a way that's unique. Top Gun captured the zeitgeist of the 1980s. People loved this movie. And it's funny because one of the most famous things about this movie is that it has a lot of homoerotic undertones. Like, there's a notable amount of gay innuendos in this movie that aren't subtle. Like, there are moments where the other male pilots will randomly say things like, "This is making me hard." And I would listen to the other pilots say things like that, and I would think, damn, okay, that's not even clever. And part of me wonders if maybe, and I'm sure other people have written about this, but maybe the appeal of this movie to a sexually repressed 20th century audience was that Maverick was the ultimate male avatar for them. Maybe people looked at this guy who was really cool, who rode a motorcycle, who was great at operating a flying death machine, who could seduce any woman he wanted, and who could comfortably hang around other men who may or may not have been gay, but at least made gay jokes, and maybe people connected with him because there hadn't quite been an action hero like him before. Maybe the story of Top Gun wasn't the appeal of this to people as much as it was getting to vicariously live out this masculine fantasy through Tom Cruise. And if that's the case, then whatever, but that doesn't mean the movie is good. Like, the romance in this is shitty, for lack of a better word. And when that romance is at least half the movie, it's hard to find things to like about the movie. If you're me anyway. So, overall, Top Gun didn't do anything for me. Some of its aesthetics are interesting, but by and large, if you separate the nostalgia from this, there's not a lot there. Top Gun is a culturally significant movie. It's the type of movie that you will probably have to watch at least once in your life. And the best thing I can say about it is that it's tolerable. You can tolerate watching it. But again, that's not the same thing as it being good. And if you're like me, if you watch this for the first time after having seen any of the myriad of superior action movies that came out after this, then Top Gun's charm might be lost on you too. Maybe. So, I give Top Gun from 1986 a less than terrific 4.56 out of 10. In other words, big ol' thumbs down for me, pretty overrated. But, how does Top Gun compare to its 2022 sequel, Top Gun Maverick? Well, I will let you know in the next video.